Saddam Hussein, the former president of Iraq, is a figure who provokes strong reactions. To some, he was a hero who stood up against Western powers and worked to modernize Iraq. To others, he was a villain responsible for immense suffering, wars, and repression. Looking at his legacy from a neutral perspective reveals a complex picture that doesn't fit neatly into either category. One of the most significant aspects of Saddam Hussein's rule was his harsh treatment of the Iraqi people and his political opponents. His government was known for severe human rights abuses. Anyone who opposed him or his government faced brutal consequences. Thousands were arrested, tortured, or killed simply for expressing dissent. Saddam maintained control through fear and violence, using his powerful security forces to suppress any opposition. One of the darkest chapters of Saddam's rule was the Anfal campaign against the Kurdish population in northern Iraq during the late 1980s. This campaign involved mass killings, destruction of villages, and the use of chemical weapons against civilians. The attack on the Kurdish town of Halabja in 1988, where about 5,000 people were killed by chemical weapons, is considered one of the worst war crimes in modern history. Saddam's aggressive foreign policies also had devastating consequences. In 1980, he launched a war against Iran that lasted for 8 years and resulted in millions of casualties. The war brought significant suffering to both countries and caused economic devastation. Later, in 1990, Saddam invaded Kuwait, leading to the Gulf War. The international community, led by the United States, intervened and drove Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. This conflict not only destroyed Kuwait but also left Iraq in ruins and led to severe economic sanctions that caused further suffering for the Iraqi people. The sanctions imposed by the United Nations after the Gulf War aimed to pressure Saddam into complying with international laws, but they ended up hurting the Iraqi population. Shortages of food, medicine, and other essential supplies caused widespread suffering, especially among children and the elderly. The humanitarian crisis that followed is a tragic part of Saddam's legacy, showing the destructive impact of his leadership on his own people. Saddam's positive contributions. However, Saddam Hussein's rule was not without some positive aspects, especially in the early years. One of the main achievements of his government was the modernization of Iraq. During the 1970s and early 1980s, Iraq saw significant development in infrastructure, including the building of roads, schools, hospitals, and public housing. Saddam's government also invested in education and healthcare, leading to improvements in literacy rates and access to medical services. Saddam was also known for promoting Arab nationalism and pan-Arabism. He positioned himself as a leader who stood against Western interference in the Middle East and sought to unite Arab nations. This stance earned him support from some Arab countries and made him a symbol of resistance against Western powers, especially during the Gulf War. In addition, Saddam's regime implemented social programs aimed at improving the lives of ordinary Iraqis. For example, there were efforts to improve women's rights, particularly in the areas of education and employment. Women were encouraged to participate in the workforce and were granted more legal rights than in many other Arab countries at the time. Saddam Hussein's legacy is complex, marked by both significant achievements and severe failures. On one hand, he modernized Iraq, built infrastructure, and promoted education and healthcare. On the other hand, his rule was characterized by brutal repression, wars, and policies that led to widespread suffering and humanitarian crises. His defiance of Western powers and his promotion of Arab nationalism made him a hero to some, but the cruelty and violence of his regime left a lasting scar on Iraq and its people. In the end, Saddam Hussein's legacy is a mix of progress and destruction, showing the dangers and consequences of authoritarian rule.